Welcome to SF Nonprofit Spotlight, brought to you by SF Commons TV. I'm Keli Dailey. Young people flooded San Francisco in 1967, from flower children to runaways fleeing troubled homes. And this next organization is rooted in that historic summer of love. It's known today as Huckleberry Youth Programs, and it provided shelter to those children back then and today. Joining me is its executive director, Doug Stiles. Doug, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. So Doug, of course, I want to talk about the pandemic. And, I was thinking about how Huckleberry has served as a safety net for young people in San Francisco and now in Marin County. And that's emergency shelter, health and mental counseling. And you've also helped divert children from juvenile hall and help them go to college. I'm wondering, with so many programming goals and mission to support young people, how was that impacted by COVID?
It's been such an interesting year in so many ways. And I think what's core to remember, for us to remember anyway, is that one of our core principles is safety. And so we approach the entire year with how can we keep the youth that we work with safe, their families safe, and our staff and the community safe. So with that eye, we fairly early in the process decided that as much as possible, let's take our staff remote and let's keep people physically distanced. Let's follow what the CDC guidelines are around how we can prevent this virus, not just from infecting the people that we work with, but also participating in reducing the spread. And so that meant significant changes to many of our programs. The shelter that you spoke of, Huckleberry House, which was opened in 1967, remained open the entire time through the pandemic. It's a shelter for runaways, but also for young people who are in crisis, who don't have a permanent place to live or couch surfing at their friend's place. And so we felt that it was imperative for the place to be open. We did reduce the number of beds there so that people would be distanced. We put in a bunch of COVID protocols there to make sure that the young people that were coming in were safe. But safety being the key kind of guided all of our decisions throughout the process. Mental health, as you talked about, our mental health all went online. So we were doing web-based psychotherapy, which was fairly new for many of our staff. So we got trained up and made sure that that could be effective and learned a lot in the process. We do health education and relationship building classes. And so all of those went online, and we actually built online modules for schools and classrooms to use. So there's so many things that we've done to change. It's been a long, long year. But I think that core of safety first has been our guiding principle.
You yourself are a trained licensed psychologist. Your agency is built to respond to and prevent emergencies. And I'm wondering if maybe you had a special skill to respond to the emergency of our last year and a half.
A special skill, that's a great question. So my training, I am a licensed psychologist. My training has been in trauma and working both with combat veterans, but also families and young people in traumatic situations. And I think that training and that background really served me well in terms of leading the organization through this process. And there's also some surprises that have happened this year. Mainly around what I don't know what to call it, but the subtle traumatization that happens when the entire community is upended and has to engage with each other in completely different ways than they have before. And it seems like, oh, it's so simple. I'll just be at home instead of being at work. But when that happens day after day after day, there's some significant things that start to happen that mimic what happens when somebody's traumatized as well. So thinking about all that with our staff and making sure that our staff are supported so that they can do the great work that they do has been critical. The other part that I think is so important for Huckleberry is that we really focus on how do we engage adolescents. And that background and that training helped us during this process as well. We know that adolescence is a very unique period in people's lives. It can be tumultuous. It can be there can be a lot of energy. There can be a lot of creativity and success, and being able to monitor and pay attention to those factors as we went through the pandemic was critical to being able to engage people remotely and being able to engage people in a unique and different way.
And readers of Season of the Witch, that seminal book about San Francisco's political and cultural milestones, they'll be familiar already with your mission and your organization. You helped shelter children with windy feet, as they were called in the time in 1967. But I'm wondering, in 50 years, how has Huckleberry not changed? What remains the same?
Well, so at the time, back in 67, I was just 2 years old, so I was not a part of the organization then. But the belief was that what the breakdown that happened in families or in society was what was causing runaways. It wasn't that somebody was a bad kid or they were doing bad things, but actually the systems that were supposed to be supporting them were no longer functioning at the level that they should be. And so people naturally ran away. And our job at Huckleberry House at the beginning, and still to this day, and in many of our programs today, is to figure out what are those broader systems and what is the level of functioning of those systems, and how do we help people get back into the systems or even improve the systems that people are within. So that could be the family, that could be education, that could be youth justice. There's many, I don't know, attempts to organize an adolescent's life that if those are not adolescent centered, then they become dysfunctional, and then people do things that we don't want them to do, and literally they themselves are not really wanting to do.
Talking about adolescent centered for a moment, specifically, San Francisco is not a city that's known to have a big young person population. And with runaways still going to big cities like San Francisco, or children in crisis maybe finding themselves here, it's still a very expensive environment. And I'm wondering, is it harder to take care of youth in crisis, young people now in San Francisco?
So what's most interesting over the years is that originally when Huckleberry started, clearly people were coming from across the country, and the majority of the people ending up in San Francisco, the young people anyway, that were served by Huckleberry were people from out of state or out of the area. Currently, almost all of our people that we work with are local. So they're San Franciscans, they're people that live in San Rafael, they're local people who are in very difficult situations. And yes, definitely the economy is a big factor in that. Families where they're not able to meet their, the rent because they're not able to earn enough to be able to survive, or multiple families living together. And that's many more families than you would think, just because the cost of living here is so high. It is affecting more and more people. And as we've seen during the shutdown, many people have lost their jobs, especially people of color who are in certain jobs that were easy for businesses to terminate. So the impact on the local economy and the people that we work with has been significant.
That is an interesting distinction from your roots, that it's not so much serving a population coming to this area, it's the people that are here sort of losing a foothold or needing extra support. And you also expanded to Marin County, so you're not just a San Francisco-based organization. Can you talk a little bit about the demographic there and who is served, and as well as San Francisco's?
Yeah, so Huckleberry started working in Marin County in the 70s, so it was fairly early in our lifespan of an agency. And the demographics of both San Francisco and Marin have changed quite significantly over those 45, 50 years. So in Marin County, we are housed in the Montecito Shopping Plaza, which is right across from San Rafael High School in San Rafael. And so primarily the young people that we serve in that area are Latinx. That's the population there in the Canal District. And those are the people that really, so we do a newcomers group. We work a lot with people who are newer to the country. We have a lot of bilingual therapists. That's the population we're primarily serving in Marin County, mainly because of location. San Francisco, it is more of a mixed group of people. We serve more Black, definitely Latinx, some Asian American and white young people as well in San Francisco. So there's more of a racial mix in San Francisco than there is in Marin.
And you mentioned earlier about what society can do to support adolescents. And I'm wondering with, we're hearing so much about mental health crisis being exacerbated by the pandemic, of course, but young people are struggling. And I wonder what we could do individually or collectively to support them better.
Well, the biggest thing I tell staff and families is listen. And it seems like such a simple thing, but as an adult working with a young person, even if they're not struggling, it's very easy for me to use my experiences and say, oh, I know what you should do in this situation. And when somebody's really struggling, it's even easier to say, listen, this is what you need to do in this situation. And we should flip that around and say, so what's going on? Tell me more about your experience. Tell me more about what's happening and really listen. What happens at Huckleberry over and over and over again is when we talk with young people, they often say, you're the first person I've told this to, or you're the first person who's actually listened to this and asked intelligent questions about what's happening to me. It's so easy to just ignore and kind of move forward and mansplain and tell people what to do. It's really hard to step back and say, no, you tell me your experience and let me learn from you. And when that happens, that's where people can start to get the help that they need. They can also feel like they're a part of the larger conversation. They're a part of the larger community as opposed to being separate from it. And the biggest problem that we have when people are feeling depressed or anxious is that they feel isolated, they feel stigmatized and not a part.
I need that reminder to not always middle-aged explain something to young people. And if I could ask you a last question, Doug, it would be about knowing when you're successful. I know that your organization helps get students into college, you follow them their first year, but I'm wondering even anecdotally, if you could tell me how Huckleberry has had an impact in young lives.
I'm happy to. The two things that happened at Huckleberry that they just make me feel great about the organization that I work for. So one is that we have staff who are former clients and they come back to us. We don't seek them out. They come back and say, my experience here was so profound. I went on, I got a master's degree in counseling, and now I want to come back and help other people. And we've heard the story several times, and we actually have a couple staff on board currently who formerly came through our services. It just shows that the work doesn't stop. It just keeps going. The second thing that I'll say that happens almost monthly, at least pre-pandemic, it happened a lot more often than it does now, is when I'm out in the community and I'm wearing a Huckleberry t-shirt or a Huckleberry hat. Almost monthly, if not more so, people come up to me and say, hey, you're with Huckleberry? I was there when I was a kid. And they changed my life. If it wasn't for Huckleberry, I would have been a teenage mom. Huckleberry really helped me when I was struggling with my family. Those kinds of stories, anecdotally, really, really show the impact of Huckleberry. It's not just one kid here or one kid there. We really have an impact across the community.
And you've helped over 200,000 young people in the course of the organization. And Doug, I wish you much success in helping many more young people. And thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So I've heard that movies are empathy machines. They make us care about other people. And what does it cost us to not have women behind the scenes making those movies? Well, joining me today are a group that is helping young women, girls, and non-binary people get training in filmmaking. And that organization is called Real Stories. Joining me today are Grace Patterson and Yasemin Ford. Hi, y'all.
Hi, nice to be here.
Welcome. And you both interestingly got training when you were younger at the first incarnation of Real Stories, which was a summer camp. And I'd love to talk to you both about your experiences, but it's so interesting. This was founded by a Pixar Studio award-winning filmmaker, Esther Pearl. And I'm wondering, specifically, Yasemin, if you can recall how you heard about Real Stories and how has it impacted you?
Absolutely. So Esther is actually my neighbor over the hill, and my next door neighbor heard that I like to make films with my siblings and my cousin, and I was kind of new to the neighborhood, and she said, like, my friend is making a film camp, like, you should check it out. So that's how I learned about Real Stories the very first year in 2013.
And now you both are staffers. And if I could maybe ask you, Grace, what do you do now and how has your role evolved since being a summer camp Real Stories person?
Yeah, so basically, I first started attending the summer camps in 2015, and I was a student for a couple of years. And then in my first year of college, I actually had the opportunity to have one of my films mixed at Dolby Studios, which was super exciting. But that gave me a lot of one-on-one time with Esther Pearl, the founder of Real Stories. And she was actually looking for somebody who was able to work at Real Stories as an intern. And I actually had a pretty available schedule, so I started working as an intern first. And I've kind of gotten a couple of different roles throughout the years. So intern, program manager, program assistant, and currently I'm the operations and media producing associate. So I definitely wear a lot of different hats at the organization, but it all started because I started attending the programs in 2015.
And Yasemin, same question. What do you do currently for Real Stories?
Currently, I am an instructor and program coordinator. So for the past year, with everything being online, I've been coming up with online curriculum and teaching it, specifically our after school programs that are now worldwide, and our advanced cohort, which is mostly for students who have gone through a couple of our programs or our camps. And then I also work with media professionals to create what we call like master classes, where they kind of like present their specialties, and I help like turn it into curriculum and manage like the communication between the professional and the students.
Good. I want to talk, Grace, for a moment about equity. And before I do, full disclosure number one, I used to teach you at Mills College, where you were a stellar student. You studied media, and you were just amazing. So that's the full disclosure.
Thank you.
But I'm wondering if you could tell us, what's the impact of training girls and women and non-binary folks to tell their stories?
I would say the impact is just, you can really see in a movie or in a TV show, you can really kind of see when that's not something that's a focus, when the focus is not on equity and inclusion. That really comes across in the way that characters are portrayed. They'll often be kind of one note and full of stereotypes and really not actually represent a lot of people's realities. But the films that we see that are produced at Real Stories, created by young teenagers having the opportunity to share their voices, they make some absolutely incredible films that are very complex and really have characters that are not one-dimensional, characters that represent their realities. And a lot of the films that are created at Real Stories have much better representation than almost anything you see in Hollywood. Most of the cast will be women and non-binary, and the stories that they create are absolutely really, really interesting and probably a little bit different than people might imagine something that teenagers are creating. But they're extremely passionate about the things that they're making, and it really shows through in the final product.
So we're getting richer content and alternative points of view.
Exactly.
And I know, Yasemin, that you train a lot of different ages, and I'm wondering if you could specifically talk about what it's like to train your youngest filmmakers and maybe give us an example of some of the work they've produced.
Yeah, so if I'm thinking about my youngest filmmakers that I've helped, those were a group of 3rd to 5th grade girls. This past year, actually, I think it was almost last summer now, where their parents were like, wow, we really need them to be doing something right now with COVID and everything. And I pretty much taught them the same things that I was teaching middle schoolers and high schoolers, just with more relevant like examples. But it was really great because they were creating like, even if it was like a princess, a movie about a princess, like she's the one who like defeated the like giant stuffed chicken. And there was other things that were like focused on nature and like action and stuff like that. So even looking at like 3rd and 5th graders, that there's kind of a targeted like media right now is like thinking about like targeting that age group is very like one-dimensional, like here's some like pink Barbies and stuff like that. Like that's not what's going on in their brains. So they were so excited. They were like every week they had something new that they had created and wanted to share with the group. So that was really cool.
I love defeating the chicken. We must and you brought up the C word, so I will have to inevitably ask about the shutdown. Due to the global pandemic, within a week, you pivoted to all virtual. And I'm wondering if the two of you learned something in the 15 months of how to instruct people or broaden the reach of real stories.
Yeah, I feel like, something that was extremely helpful for us was in early 2021, we merged with BAVAC, the Bay Area Video Coalition. It's been really helpful to have a larger team. But it was really difficult in the beginning to switch to online programming because it's something that the Real Stories team had never done before. We've always been a really small team working out of one office in Oakland. And so to suddenly broaden our reach, there was a lot of things that we learned. We had to kind of figure out what programming people liked and how to advertise it. And it's just, competing for attention online is definitely a very different sphere than what we had been in previously, where we would go into schools and advertise the programs and things like that. Having it be a lot more over email or creating advertisements online, we really had to find ways to advertise to people to make sure that people knew that these programs existed, because people out there want to be a part of Real Stories and want to be a part of our filmmaking programs, but it's just hard to get the word out sometimes. So I would say something that we learned during COVID-19 is just a little bit more about who we really are as an organization and how to spread the word to people about us.
And same question to you, Yasemin. What is the 15-month training that we've been getting in the pandemic times helped you see?
Yeah, well, there's definitely things that are way more difficult to teach, like with equipment and stuff like that. But I've actually, a couple of my lessons, I feel like actually improved with being over Zoom. For example, if I'm teaching like editing with Premiere or After Effects, it's actually so cool that I could literally draw on my students' like screen and be like, okay, click this, like this is what that does. Instead of if we were in person, I might be tempted to just be like, hey, let me just do that for you. And this way, like it was like in some ways less hands-on with like equipment, but I think with technology, it was more hands-on for the students. And they also had to put like equipment checkout like more into their hands. So if I think back of like what we've learned that I think we'll implement after like all of these restrictions have been lifted, is just that we can continue to do online training, especially when it comes to like editing. So.
Sounds like more autonomy was given to students in some ways.
Yeah, definitely. We usually focus like for our summer camp specifically on each group of like around 5 students on making their own film. But this past summer, we were open for individuals to take on entire projects by themselves if that was what they were able to do. And, you know, if they're like in a different city than us, like that might work better for them.
And full disclosure number 2, Grace mentioned that Real Stories is now powered by Bay Area Video Coalition, and BAVAC, as they're lovingly known. They produce this show, SF Nonprofit Spotlight. So there is so much continuation here in this group here. And you're now located in San Francisco. And I'm wondering if you could perhaps talk about what does this merger change or not change about Real Stories? Yasmin or Grace?
Yeah, I think one thing that's like kind of funny is that even though we are now in San Francisco, like physically I've stayed, you know, in the same place. So that's definitely been kind of funny being like, oh, I work in San Francisco. But yeah, I think one of the greatest things that have like been that BAVAC has let us stay kind of as our own, like we still focus on our programs focus on women and girls and non-binary students, whereas BAVAC is very like much more open to different demographics. And that was something that they made clear even before we actually merged, that they would let us continue to do that.
Excellent. And I wanted to talk a moment about expanding the pool. And I'm wondering, before I let you go, are you hopeful at the current state of film?
Yeah, I would say, you know, I worked with the Real Stories student board this year, and they created a really amazing documentary about the 2020 election. It's on the Real Stories YouTube channel. But just, you know, meeting every week with these young people and hearing the conversations they were having about media and hearing them talk about the shows and movies that they had watched recently, I really feel like in the next 10 or 20 years, we're going to see amazing changes once they do enter the film and television industry. And even if they don't, as consumers, being so much more aware of these issues of equity and inclusion and all sorts of things like that within media, I think that as consumers, people are going to start making more demands that things will become equitable. And, you know, I can already see the change happening with our youth that are, you know, 12 years old, 15 years old. You know, we've had people come through the programs and have completed film school and are now having jobs in the film industry. So I really think that the change is coming, and it's actually already happening. And it can sometimes be difficult to believe when you'll watch a movie and it's just filled with a ton of sexism. But the pushback that they get now has been way larger than I saw even just 10 years ago. So I really think that the change is coming. Even if it's slow, even if there's an adjustment period, I can see a real difference, even just in the youth that we're reaching through Real Stories.
And Yasemin, I'm wondering if you feel hopeful, and also if someone were to be interested in Real Stories, what kind of things would you tell them about it? If they are hesitant, or maybe they think they don't have the funding to get involved, what might you say?
I think that we are so lucky to live in the Bay Area and to have programs like Real Stories so that we understand that there's an issue. Because going to film school, specifically UCLA, I was in larger classes where I feel like the film industry is kind of pushing a narrative that like solved like racism and sexism issues, because a lot of my classmates were like, I'm so happy to be like joining the film industry right now. Like everything is so great. And like, we have like reached equality. And I've been like, wait a second, like I know the stats, like I've been going to Real Stories and I know there's still work to be done. So if people are interested in participating, we have so many different programs. We literally just like, programs are like born based off of what people want to do. And also we have sliding scale. We offer full scholarships for like different tuitions for our programs. And really depending on like what our class, who makes up our class, we basically like cater everything to make sure that we're matching your skill level. So don't be afraid and come and join us.
Grace Patterson is the Operations and Media Producing Associate for Real Stories, and Yasemin Ford is an instructor and program coordinator. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.